Hi everyone, this is Mr. Bine here with some tips on how to make a great science fair poster. As always with any project, the best way to ensure that you're going to perform highly is to look at the grading sheet, see exactly what the expectations are, and make sure that you meet each one. So my expectations for this particular poster are as follows. First of all, you have to have a clear, descriptive, eye-grabbing title that will make somebody who's walking by your poster want to say, "Oh, what's that? That seems interesting." Next, inside your introduction, you want to make sure that you can guide the reader into the paper and make the topic clear and relevant. So why do I care about the topic you chose to study? Make me care here. While doing so, be sure to synthesize 5 reliable sources into a context for your topic. So remember, you looked up some resources that you could reference that were reliable. Here you can take the basic findings from those resources and synthesize them together and summarize what's already known about your topic. And don't forget to include citations from those sources. Then, after setting up, you can hit the viewer with the actual hypothesis, making sure that your hypothesis is refutable or testable or falsifiable, and that it explains why. So X causes Z because blank. And then, so that's a sort of more general statement about what's the cause and effect relationship that's going on inside your experiment, and then right after that you can have a clearly stated prediction for the results specific to your experiment. So what exactly do you think you're going to see after you've run the experiment? All right, that's the introduction. Next section, a procedure or methods section that first of all lists procedural steps in order in enough detail that a reader could repeat your experiment. So somebody could be reading this and say, "Oh, that's interesting that they got these results. I wonder if I could get the same results." And they could look at this list of steps and be able to repeat exactly what you did. To help somebody else do that, make sure that you include at least one diagram or picture of your environmental setup to give the person a visual of what you are actually doing. Make sure that you clearly identify the independent and dependent variables in your experiment, as well as the experimental and control group or groups that you used. And while doing this procedure, include some details on how you controlled for confounding variables, so you're sure that the only variable you were testing was the independent one, not some confounding variable that snuck into your experiment and was actually causing the effect. Your results section should report exactly what your data is, but importantly, it should not interpret your data. So don't make any statements during your results about whether you've supported or refuted your hypothesis. Save that for the discussion. A results section simply says, here are our findings, here's the data, here's the results, and that's it. So don't do any interpretation. But to present your findings, please do include a graph with a title and labeled axes and averages across your data. In the past, I've gotten lots of graphs that include every single data point that people collected. That's not very meaningful to the onlooker in comparison to the averages. So make sure that your graph says, all right, on average in my experimental group, I was getting results like this, whereas in my control group, results like this. Of course, the more times you repeated your experiment, then the stronger your data is, and so you'll get points for a large number of replicates right here. And then lastly, you should have a caption for your graph that reiterates exactly what your graph is showing. Again, it's not saying this has more than that or my hypothesis is supported. No, none of that interpretation. Instead, it's just saying the results for my experimental group were blank, whereas for my control group were blank. So you're just reiterating in words exactly what the graph shows. All right. Then comes your discussion. That's where the interpretation piece comes in, and you can start discussing and explaining whether you think your hypothesis was supported, refuted, or neither. And be sure not to overstate or understate your results. If you use language like, "This definitely proves that my hypothesis is correct," my eyebrow is going to be raised, as will most scientists, because, as we learned at the beginning of the year, you can't definitively prove anything. You can only support or refute an idea by gathering data that either supports or refutes that idea. So make sure that you're not saying that you totally proved something or that you were totally wrong. Or if you know that there were big flaws in your experiment, you can say, I neither supported nor refuted my hypothesis. And more data is going to need to be gathered before we can figure out whether the hypothesis might be true or not. So don't be scared to just say that neither if you think you didn't really have conclusive results, because that would make you an honest scientist. You should then discuss weaknesses in your experiments that future researchers should address, because every experiment has weaknesses, so don't be shy about sharing them and giving some insights from your experimental process. Then start taking your results and putting them back in the greater context. So you started off this paper by talking about what other people had researched. Now it's time to say, all right, based on my findings, here's what I've now contributed to what is known about my topic. So finding those greater implications for your project. And then lastly, propose new areas of study that could further your line of research. So the next person who wants to do a science fair like you, how should they do similarly? How should they do differently? What's a related question that they could maybe answer? And then right at the end of that, you'll have a bibliography with at least 5 reliable references in APA format, just like we learned at the beginning of the year. So overall, your visual presentation, in other words, your actual physical poster, will get points for having clear writing, concise writing, so that means no more words than are necessary. Don't ramble on and on. Write only exactly what you need to. Summarize very concisely. Make sure that your writing is proofread so there aren't a lot of typos. That your images and graphs are clear and visually appealing. And that overall things look neat and have cool factors. So if you want to decorate your board, that's fine. Don't decorate it with something random like giraffes if you're doing your experiment on ice and the properties of water. Decorate it with something that's relevant. But anything that adds cool factor can earn you a couple of extra points here. And then lastly, we will be making small podcasts, narrations that will guide a listener through your poster. So, and you'll be making this podcast online. I'll give more details on how to do this, and then create a QR code so that the person who comes up to your poster can use their iPad or whatever, scan the QR code, and it will take them right to a podcast of you speaking and presenting your poster. And in that presentation, you will get points for having clear, audible speech. So that means audible means that you can hear it. You'll get points for using an engaging tone that doesn't sound monotone or red, but sounds like you're talking to the person. That it effectively summarizes the content of the board, so really gets to all corners and all areas of the board, but is no shorter than 2 minutes and no longer than 5 minutes. So again, you don't want to shortcut through everything, but you don't want to take more of people's time than they really want. So figuring out a way to effectively summarize and pick out the most important elements from your board. And that totals at 185 points. So needless to say, without this project, it's going to be very, very difficult to pass the quarter and pass the semester. So make sure, of all the things that you may miss in your life, do not miss science fair. Okay, good luck, guys. Read my directions carefully, my written directions carefully, so you can see which of these sections is due at which point.